Good morning, everybody. It's your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, sitting on a paddleboard in front of a cliff, kind of on the way towards the Duncan Bridge Marina. Hopefully this week I will have a video somewhere close, if not underneath Duncan Bridge, but today we're going to continue or resume our discussion about the Great Depression, what caused it. I kind of want to highlight some of the Federal Reserve's roles in it. We will eventually go over the actual establishment of the Federal Reserve, but man, dude, just look at how beautiful this area is. Just stunning. I don't know, I've probably paddleboarded like 1.5 miles to get over here, maybe 2 miles, but there's 21,000 acres worth of water coverage. I think total, 21,000 in the Smith Lake region, but there's some nice cliff sides. This area used to be dry, but they dammed it up. Anyways, so a huge reason why the Great Depression became as bad as it did is because of debt deflation, which is a consequence of over-leveraging. The Federal Reserve's easy money policies in the Roaring 20s, similar to what we've seen kind of leading up to today from the 2008 period, caused asset prices in the stock market to explode in value. Also, very similar to what we've seen over the last 10 years in our own time. Now, Irving Fisher is a huge proponent of what's known as debt deflation, which is a consequence of asset prices losing value whenever people are mortgaged to the hilt, also like today. And it's he kind of elucidates 9 steps that it occurs in. First, the debt liquidates and distress selling begins. So people start to sell their assets because they're afraid, right? And they have loans out against them. They use the money they get from these assets to repay their loans. Now, because so many people are selling their crap all at the same time, it pushes the prices down. And eventually you get to a point where selling the asset is not enough to cover how much is owed on the asset. It's like if you get underwater on your house, for example, kind of like what happened to some people after the 2008 crisis. They couldn't even sell their houses and not be in debt anymore. This eventually leads to a fall in profits for businesses and a decrease in the business's net worth, which triggers a wave of bankruptcies, further exacerbating the issues. And all of this together combined kind of creates a loss of confidence in the economic system. And people begin to hoard money, which further contracts the monetary supply. And we might see a fall in nominal interest rates, like if the Federal Reserve lowers their interest rates, but the actual real interest rates in terms of purchasing power increase. Another commonality between today and the Great Depression, like 1920s era, is trading on margin, which is basically where investors use the bank's money to quote-unquote invest, speculate is what I would call it. During the Great Depression, if an investor had $10, the banks would give them up to $90. I think today there's literally a 0% requirement. Back then it was 10, so we could be even worse in those terms today. So, Black Tuesday, the day that the stock market crashed during the Great Depression, the stock market lost $14 billion in a single day and $30 billion that week. Now, that's not a whole lot in modern terms, but back then that was actually more than the U.S. spent on all of World War I. Or another way to phrase it, it was 10 times the U.S.'s annual budget. That's a ton of value to lose in just a week. By 1930, within a year, the stock market lost 90% of its value. Now, with so many Americans hedging their retirements on the value of their stock portfolios because of things like 401ks, it definitely makes me worried about what we might see if there's a similar drop in the stock market. Now, back then, the Federal Reserve really did not do a whole lot to intervene and protect it. It's known as like the leave it alone liquidationism. Hoover's actually got a pretty famous quote from his cabinet where somebody talks about like the corruption that had become prevalent during the 20s. And whenever the economy began to crash, they said, liquidate labor, liquidate stocks, liquidate the farmers, liquidate real estate. It will purge the rottenness out of the system, and high costs of living and high living will come down. People will become more moral. Basically, they felt like the economy needed to crash, so they did not intervene. 20% of Americans' money that was kept in banks disappeared entirely during this time. Now today we have the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation that should protect regular people against stuff like that from happening, but we'll see. New homes stopped being built. It fell by 85%. Now, the monetarists, people like Milton Friedman, they don't blame the Fed for triggering the Depression, but they do blame them for exacerbating it, making it worse, because they did not intervene. They basically think that the 30% reduction in the U.S.'s money supply led to a credit crunch, and that is kind of like what caused business to dry up entirely. Now, as a consequence of this debt deflation thing, basically outstanding debts became harder to carry because prices started to deflate, and so did wages in response. As a result, even though like the dollar value, like what you owe, like if you checked your balance on your student loans or something, it wouldn't change, but all of a sudden you're making 20 or 30% less at work. So the actual weight that it has on you is worse. Waddell Catchings, William Foster, Rayford Tugwell believed that inequality was a key factor, and even Henry Ford, as well as some other businessmen, had kind of seen this coming from down the road. Henry Ford in 1914, now this is like 15 years prior to the Great Depression, he doubled his workers' pay because he was concerned about overproduction and underconsumption, right? So businesses were incredibly profitable during the 20s, but regular workers did not share adequately in the nation's prosperity, and that definitely contributed somewhat to the economic decline in the Great Depression. Now, overall, the Great Depression is it's a very large topic, so it's hard to cover fully, but just some commonalities that I've seen through my working on the doors and over my lifetime and from 2008 is we see massively overinflated stock prices. Also, leading up to the Great Depression, businesses were not paying their workers much, right? Which is what we see today happening. But what they were doing is they were basically doing the equivalent of stock buybacks, but in the 30s, where they would take the profits of the business and instead of paying their workers, or like increasing their workers' pay with it, they would reinvest it into the stock prices. Now again, remember I said that by 1930, from 1929, stocks lost 90% of their value. So most of that money was lost, gone forever. We see something very similar happening today with the highest rate of stock buybacks ever. GlassSteagall, the legislation that FDR introduced to regulate the banking industry after the Great Depression, prohibited stock buybacks. It's been repealed. So we don't have those protections anymore. Companies can take all the value their workers produce and reinvest it in themselves, primarily benefiting the largest shareholders, which are typically very wealthy people. So what can we do to respond and prepare ourselves against these kinds of things from happening? Mainly, live beneath your means. Learn how to live with less. Again, Smith Lake's freely available to anybody. I'm sure there are, maybe not anything as big as this, but there are places that you can go where you live that are enjoyable. You can spend time outside without spending any money. Do not take out debt. Make sure that you use everything. Don't be wasteful. I'll try to come up with some more actionable advice for my next topic. Covering the entire Great Depression is a very huge task, so I apologize if I'm a little unfocused. Anyways, as always, my message remains the same. Spend less, live more, earn your freedom with frugality. This is your favorite aspiring revolutionary here, a wandering author, reminding you that we are all the authors of our own lives. What are you guys doing to inspire, uplift, and empower your community today? Because this world isn't changing unless we all do our part, and you can count on me to do mine daily. So, until next time, y'all have a good day now. Love you guys.